Historically, you're absolutely right that the kind of democratic media always sort of has as its component face-to-face interaction of various kinds, and meetings like this where people get together and educate each other rather than listening to some paid talking head.
Taking another point from what this gentleman said, also, I'll point this out. I learned something. I worked in a public library in Skokie for 10 years, and half of that time I spent running the computer lab when I was there. And so I actually, because of where I sat, I could tell you what people, where they get their news. I mean, when they're online. And the people in this room, I think, would have somewhat different sources. I think a lot of you are fairly progressive people, and you know about the internet, and you know where to look, and you've learned, and you've got circles and communities and groups that you belong to, and you know. And some of you are committed activists for years and years, and you've studied the net, and you know how to find things. The average person often doesn't, and what they're left with is, instead of watching a Channel 2 news, now they'll go to WBBM TV website, and that's where they'll get a lot of their news. Or they'll go to the CNN website, and they've not heard of these left-wing radical websites that maybe some of us have heard of. The vast majority of people, in other words, this is a slow transition, actually. I mean, people are not going to change their ways right away. And this idea of building a public network, in part using the pieces of the existing public media that do work or can be made to work, is just a much more sensible idea in terms of giving people something that they might trust and might know where it is and know about it already.
You had a question. Sorry.
Yes, I think we should also put an antitrust provision in the local FM stations, low power stations, so the big broadcasters don't find a way to
religious broadcasters are also.
So according the way that the LPFM license works is you have to be a nonprofit.
Yeah.
No, they can't be. So no commercial broadcaster.
I mean, at least they were smart enough to put that.
Yeah, no commercial broadcaster.
They didn't put it automatically. They were pressured by community groups to say.
They were pressured by community groups to do that. The interesting thing is that now that we have these licenses, progressive groups, civic groups, and social movements actually have to seize and make use of those licenses. Otherwise, they're going to be snapped up by like right-wing churches. And so it's very important.
Oh yeah, it's happened already.
It's happened. It's happened already. If you
Yes.
belong to an environmental group or a labor group, when a license becomes available in your area, you need to grab it and get into the business of producing radio. And it has made a real difference where, so say, for example, down in Florida, the
Coalition of Immokalee Workers.
Coalition of Immokalee Workers, the tomato pickers in Florida, have a low-power FM radio station that broadcasts in all the 3 languages that the farm workers who belong to the Coalition of Immokalee Workers speak. And it's the only place that they can turn to for news about their organizing and their various struggles and other issues facing their community, because basically those farm workers are simply invisible in the mainstream corporate media, and their struggles are invisible. So it's absolutely important when these low-power FM licenses become available that we, on the left, are organized enough to grab them and to do something with them. Absolutely. We got other, yeah.
We got time for really one question.
What? Okay, Solomon, go ahead.
Yeah, it just seems to me that basically coming back to a couple of things that you said, the coming together of a technological shift and also a social shift is an important thing. And we're talking about, some of that happening right now. The internet is a technological shift. The LPFM is not necessarily a technological shift, but it is a shifting of the terrain that we're talking about. But it seems to me that all of the stuff, really the foundation of any sorts of, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about has to be that there needs to be a social movement.
Absolutely.
And that's what's lacking.
Yes.
So, see,
Yes.
even if we were talking about an LPFM and snatching up the licenses,
right.
if you don't have enough people, if you don't have enough, enough human capital, if you will, and I
Right.
put it in those words. No, because
Well,
it is
yeah,
actually,
no, I think
even
that's
the LPFM stuff is,
Right.
in a sense, it's a privatization of the airwaves. It
Right.
just happens to be that it's being done by public domain, and we're talking about snatching up our part of it.
Right.
The issue is that this is going to get divided up based on the social forces on the ground. If the right is stronger, of course the right-wing churches are going to grab most of them. If the left is stronger, it is going to be the CFL and everybody else that's going to grab the most of it. So it's really a reflection of everything else that's going on. And we can't approach this from a moralistic approach.
Oh, no, absolutely.
We have to look at it in terms of concrete stuff on the ground of what the balance of forces are. And that's where the question of organizing comes from. I mean, I'll
Absolutely.
finish with one thing, which is the obsession with the technological stuff in media. But, you know, I mean, the best example of the stuff that happened was, I just happened to be in Iran during all the stuff
With the Twitter and
with the Twitter revolution. It was not a Twitter revolution. Okay,
It was a revolution.
it was the revolution that actually produced all sorts
Right.
of ways of people expressing themselves. It was completely the other way around, and that is the thing to understand. That it's the movements that actually change the media, change the ownership of the media, rather than. I just want to.
I couldn't agree more, and if I was suggesting anything else in my talk, I hope that didn't come through, because my view is basically, you want to look at the history of the FCC, it's reflected the history of social movements that have brought pressure to bear on the FCC, and the public has gotten more access to the airwaves precisely at that moment when a particular social movement has reached its crest. Whether it's the labor movement in the 1930s, or the women's movement and the civil rights movement in the 1960s. Both, in both of those periods, we saw lots of interesting things happening, and the public getting more access to the airwaves. And absolutely you're right, it reflects the state of forces on the ground, which is a depressing thought if you think of where the left is right now, and our capacity to bring any kind of pressure at all to bear, on the forces of capital. That's a very depressing thought, but I would totally agree.
But from that depression, I'm going to give you maybe the biggest ray of hope that you can take away with you tonight. And that is that if this current crest of activism, which is coinciding with this technology shift and the terrain shifts, if we can just get that crest up high enough so that we do create some kind of really supercharged, democracy-oriented, democratically structured public media system, even if we don't get all the money at first, if we can just get a democratic structure in place through the social movements, building them up right now, we can create a system of media that will
May we have your attention, please? The time is now 8:45. The library will close in 15
Right
minutes.
there, before you get to the
Make your
punchline.
final selection.
Well, actually,
That's for checkout.
that would actually create an engine, a self-generating activism engine through the media. In other words, once you crest and reach this point where you can make this radical change, you will have created a system that will maintain that level and will keep people involved at a much higher level of activism than they are now.
On that note, we've got all of this. Thank you.
We have the full audio of this. It will be available on the Chicago Media Action